Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. She didn't show up. Not to the meeting, not to the call, not even to breathe again. August 15th, 2009. Buena Park, California, early morning. A sanitation worker clearing debris near a parking complex on Industrial Way spotted a suitcase, beaten up, wedged between weeds, zipper twisted at the edge like it had resisted something. He tried to shift it aside. It was heavier than it should have been. Blood seeped through the fabric. He stepped back, then made the call. Buena Park PD arrived on site at 7:31 a.m. No ID was found. No clothing beyond a disheveled swimsuit. The body had been jammed into the case, limbs bent unnaturally. Most of the teeth were missing. Fingertips had been cut off. Whatever happened here wasn't just a homicide. It was concealment, pre-plan. Someone had gone to deliberate lengths to make sure she could never be named. Except they forgot one thing. The coroner flagged a subdermal foreign object in the upper chest cavity, a silicone breast implant. Within 48 hours, a serial number led them to the manufacturer, and from there, to the registered surgery, Beverly Hills, 2006. That gave the LAPD a name. Jasmine Fiore, age 28. Profession: model, promotional hostess, part-time actress. Last known residence: West Hollywood. Last seen alive: Del Mar, California. That was the first real data point. Fiore had been reported missing less than 24 hours before her body was found. The call didn't come from her husband. It came from her mother. Police records noted she hadn't answered any texts since Friday. Her vehicle was still at home. Her phone was powered off. No security breach at her apartment. But no signs of travel, no checked flights, no bus tickets. Something was off. By Monday morning, homicide detectives had logged their first field visit to her condominium on Edinburgh Avenue. The unit was neat, undisturbed. A full set of keys, passport, purse, all untouched. The refrigerator still held food with expiration dates from that week. There was no note, no panic, just a woman who had vanished without logical cause. Jasmine wasn't just any missing person. She had a recognizable public profile. Her images were scattered across Las Vegas promotional catalogs. She'd worked high-profile events: car shows, casino launches, swimsuit calendars. Local media took notice. The case broke on KTLA before lunch. Then the call started. People recognized her face. One of those calls came from a hotel concierge in Del Mar. On the night of August 13th, Jasmine Fiore had checked into L'Auberge Del Mar. She wasn't alone. Surveillance logs confirmed she was accompanied by a white male, 30s, registered under the name Ryan Jenkins. The two had dinner at the hotel restaurant and were seen entering the elevator at 2:30 a.m. on the 14th. Only Jenkins returned, alone. At 4:37 a.m., he checked out. Fiore was never seen alive again. At that point in the investigation, Jenkins hadn't been contacted. He hadn't come forward. He hadn't called the police. There was no 911 call. Detectives flagged the name for background processing. The initial data came back clean. Dual citizen, U.S. and Canada. No felony convictions. Worked in real estate. Recently appeared on a VH1 reality series. Megan Wants a Millionaire. But something about the timeline didn't hold. According to hotel logs, the couple arrived together, but there was no record of Jasmine leaving. No camera caught her departing the property. Her phone last pinged at 3:04 a.m., 1 mile south of the hotel. After that, silence. The coroner's report was finalized on August 18th. Primary cause of death: manual strangulation. Estimated time of death: between 2:45 and 4:15 a.m. There were bruises on the arms consistent with restraint, defensive wounds on the forearms, blunt force trauma to the head, post-mortem, signs of body manipulation. To the naked eye, the mutilation seemed meant to obscure identity, but to forensic analysts, it was sloppily done. Tooth extraction without acid dissolution, finger removal without thermal damage. There was no burning, no disfigurement beyond point concealment. That indicated haste. Someone who wanted the body hidden but lacked surgical experience. Her blood alcohol level was low. No trace of sedatives. No signs of sexual assault. Whoever did this didn't need to overpower her with drugs. They were close enough to catch her off guard. Detectives logged over 22 interviews within the first 72 hours. Friends, agents, co-workers. Most described Jasmine as independent, bold, but guarded. She had a history of stormy relationships. One close friend mentioned Jasmine had recently reconnected with someone from the past while still living with her husband. She was planning to separate but hadn't told him yet. Another source said Jenkins had a temper, but always smiled in public. The contrast struck the lead investigator. It was all surface. Glamour, glitz, picture perfect. But behind it, she was pulling away. You could see the brakes forming. One thing was clear. Jasmine didn't leave that hotel alive. Jasmine Fiore wasn't a stranger to police databases. She wasn't buried in some missing person backlog, waiting years to be found. She was flagged, tagged, and identified within hours because she had something most victims don't: a traceable implant and a digital footprint that didn't lie still. The coroner confirmed her identity on August 17th through the serial number etched into a saline breast implant. That led detectives straight to a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon, then to her DMV photo, and finally to her name: Jasmine Fiore, born February 18, 1981. Occupation listed: promotional model. Residence: West Hollywood. But identity alone wasn't enough. Homicide needed a profile. They began with her phone. Fiore's last known cell activity occurred at 3:04 a.m. on August 14th. A text message was sent from her phone to a friend in Los Angeles. Brief, non-committal. Still out, back soon. Tower triangulation placed the signal just south of Del Mar. After that, there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no logins. The phone shut off at 3:27 a.m. For analysts, that timing was critical. The surveillance at L'Auberge Del Mar placed Jasmine and her male companion entering their suite around 2:30 a.m. Her phone signal moving off property by 3 a.m. raised a question. Did she leave on her own, or was the phone moved separately? A data analyst reviewing tower bounce pointed out a pattern. It wasn't traveling on foot. The signal moved too fast between zones. That ruled out a voluntary departure. Someone drove that phone, and it wasn't her. Her laptop was recovered from her condo by tech forensics. It had not been used since August 12th. Her browser history showed searches for apartment listings, divorce attorneys in California, and one recurring name in her inbox: her former fiancé. Investigators dug into the messages. Over 14 emails exchanged in the 2 weeks leading up to her disappearance. The content wasn't romantic. It was logistical. Discussions of moving out, ending things with discretion, and keeping interactions quiet for safety. Her closest friend, interviewed on August 16th, confirmed Jasmine had expressed fear about how her current partner would react to separation. She'd started removing items from her apartment in secret. She didn't want to trigger anything. She said she needed time and space, and that things had gotten intense. That word, intense, showed up in more than one interview. Former co-workers recalled erratic check-ins from Jasmine when she was scheduled for events. One supervisor said she'd started canceling last minute. She'd always been reliable before. This year, she seemed distracted. At the same time, investigators built out a digital timeline. They pulled swipe card data from the Del Mar Hotel. The room had been accessed twice between 2:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Both entries logged under the same keycard. Jasmine's ID had never been used to re-enter. Staff confirmed the companion, now publicly identified as Ryan Jenkins, was the sole person to check out hours later. No one saw Jasmine leave the building. The room had been cleaned by hotel staff at 11 a.m. on August 14th. No visible signs of struggle. Towels were used but laundered. Nothing flagged the housekeeper. Police collected linens and waste bins for forensic screening. Those samples were still in queue as of the first case meeting at Orange County Sheriff's Office. Meanwhile, Jasmine's car remained untouched in the garage at her West Hollywood residence. Parking logs showed no activity after August 13th. That locked in her timeline. She hadn't driven home. She hadn't taken a rideshare. She hadn't flown. She simply stopped existing after 3:27 a.m. The case file grew fast. By August 19th, Jasmine's background had been fully outlined. Native of Santa Cruz, moved to Los Angeles in early 2000s. History in commercial modeling, occasional work in Vegas, a handful of minor television credits, and no prior criminal record. Friends described her as self-managed, cautious, and pragmatic. She didn't take unnecessary risks. She rarely traveled without notifying someone, and she had started documenting her concerns about her relationship through emails, encrypted messaging apps, and even handwritten notes in a personal organizer, which investigators recovered from a drawer near her kitchen. In one note, dated July 30th, she wrote, "I don't feel safe when he's angry. I'm watching everything I say now. Just need out. Quietly." There was no mention of who he was. Behind the glamour, behind the filtered images and event reels, was a woman trying to regain control of her own life. A woman quietly planning to leave a relationship. A woman surrounded by public visibility, but living in private isolation. In homicide investigations, silence can mean one of two things. Either the victim vanished voluntarily, or the victim never got the chance to leave. In Jasmine Fiore's case, the silence wasn't accidental. And if that silence was engineered, someone had something to hide. At 2:30 a.m. on August 14, 2009, surveillance footage from L'Auberge Del Mar showed a man and a woman entering the elevator together. She wore a white jacket over a cocktail dress. He held the door open. They didn't speak. The woman looked ahead. He looked down. That was the last confirmed image of Jasmine Fiore alive. The man in the video was identified as Ryan Alexander Jenkins, age 32, dual citizen of the US and Canada, occupation listed as real estate investor. He had recently filmed a reality TV series, Megan Wants a Millionaire, produced by 51 Minds Entertainment for VH1. Though the show had not yet aired in full, Jenkins had already become recognizable among Los Angeles casting agencies. His social media profile portrayed success, expensive cars, yachts, luxury condos. But none of that explained why, after checking out of L'Auberge Del Mar less than 2 hours later, Jenkins never contacted police or Jasmine's family, even as she failed to return home and her body turned up in a suitcase 3 days later. When detectives attempted contact on August 18th, Jenkins could not be located. He hadn't returned to his listed address. His phone had gone dark. His vehicle, a black BMW X5, was last seen heading northeast on Interstate 15. He was not named a suspect at the time, but his disappearance triggered a closer look. Investigators accessed the hotel's swipe card logs. The room key registered 2 entries that night, once at 2:32 a.m. and again at 3:54 a.m. Both times the same card, assigned to Jenkins, was used. Jasmine's name was on the reservation as a guest, but she had not been issued her own key. There was no record of her exiting the property. Further review of the footage revealed a troubling detail. While Jenkins was seen entering the elevator with Jasmine, no footage ever showed her leaving, by hallway, by stairwell, or through the lobby. The only person leaving at 4:27 a.m. was Jenkins, alone. Pulling a wheeled duffel bag, detectives filed a request with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. On August 19th, border logs showed that Jenkins had entered Canada on foot through a remote crossing near Point Roberts, Washington, less than 72 hours after Fiore's remains were found. He had used his Canadian passport. No declaration of travel or accommodation had been filed. It was clear he was avoiding major checkpoints. Back in California, his SUV was located in a storage facility in Nevada. The vehicle had been abandoned, keys still in the ignition. Inside, investigators recovered trace evidence: carpet fiber, a length of plastic sheeting, and packaging tape. The rear cargo area tested positive for human blood using luminol spray, though confirmatory DNA results were pending. Technicians noted something else. The passenger side floor mat had been removed. All 4 tires were mismatched. The glove box had been emptied. It was methodical, but not perfect. By the evening of August 19th, Jenkins was classified as a person of interest. He had not been charged. No arrest warrant had been issued, but a joint task force was initiated between Orange County Homicide and the RCMP in British Columbia. His name, photograph, and travel history were entered into Interpol's alert database under a locate and interview flag. Meanwhile, search warrants were issued for his residence in Los Angeles. Inside, investigators found a small collection of surveillance equipment, pinhole cameras, recording devices, and a laptop with encrypted messaging software. The laptop's browser history showed searches for how long before body decomposes in heat, how to destroy dental evidence, acid fingerprint removal. Most recent access, August 15th. The morning Fiore's body was found. The forensic team flagged a folder marked private in the file directory, password protected. Active efforts to crack it were underway, but metadata showed the folder had been opened at 5:41 a.m. on August 14th, roughly 1 hour after Jenkins left the hotel. At this stage, investigators still avoided public speculation. There were no official suspects, but within law enforcement circles, the silence was telling. A woman was dead, her body desecrated, and the man last seen with her, who had not reported her missing, had not cooperated with police, and had left the country without explanation, was actively hiding. Detectives familiar with the case noted a common problem. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. Everything Jenkins left behind painted a controlled image. No panic, no inconsistencies, but the timing, the sudden vanishing act, and the forensic gaps all pointed toward one conclusion. Someone had rehearsed this. From a procedural standpoint, this was no longer a missing persons case or even a routine homicide. It was an active cross-border investigation involving forensic analysis, digital evidence retrieval, and a manhunt for a person with international mobility and significant financial resources. But behind the paperwork was still a victim. Jasmine Fiore's remains had been delivered to her family that week. A private service was held. No cameras, no press, just silence. In her obituary, there was no mention of how she died, only that she lived with light, with pride, and with purpose. That, too, became part of the record. On August 20th, 2009, forensic investigators were granted access to room 327 at L'Auberge del Mar, 5 days after the body had been discovered and 6 days after the couple's final check-in. Though hotel staff had already completed standard cleaning, law enforcement issued a partial contamination waiver, knowing trace evidence could still survive deep clean cycles. The room looked untouched. The bed was made, towels were replaced, and toiletries had been restocked. But once luminol was applied, the surface neutrality dissolved. Streaks lit up along the bathroom baseboard and inner shower tile, clear indicators of blood that had been cleaned but not eliminated. A light mist pattern behind the toilet matched projected backflow from blunt trauma. Forensics flagged 3 areas for swab testing: near the sink basin, on the tub's edge, and inside the door frame. All samples tested presumptive positive for human blood, with confirmation tests expedited by the Orange County Crime Lab. The blood was later matched to Jasmine Fiore through mitochondrial DNA. There was no blood elsewhere in the suite. That detail mattered. The containment of biological evidence suggested the event had a defined location and duration. No blood on bedding, no blood near the door, no blood in the common area. That narrowed the attack site to the bathroom. A separate team processed the keycard data again, this time correlating timestamps to known activities. 2:30 a.m. Jasmine and Ryan enter the room together. 3:54 a.m. Keycard logs another entry, presumably Jenkins re-entering after leaving briefly. 4:27 a.m. Jenkins checks out at the front desk. Jasmine is never seen again. During that 57-minute gap between 2:30 and 3:27 a.m., no one else entered or exited the room. Surveillance showed no service personnel, no noise complaints, no activity from adjacent rooms. Security footage from the hallway captured Jenkins pulling a black duffel bag as he left. Hotel staff described him as calm, a little rushed, but not panicked. That observation was noted in the incident report, not because it suggested guilt, but because it ruled out disarray. People fleeing crime scenes don't often stop to fold towels and return the key in person. As the forensic team worked, investigators revisited other evidence logged from the abandoned vehicle in Nevada. Carpet fiber recovered from the SUV's rear matched the brand and color pattern of the duffel bag seen in the hotel footage. In the cargo compartment, a single blonde hair was recovered, chemically treated, rootless, but visually consistent with the victim. Forensic microscopy later confirmed it was human. Mitochondrial DNA was inconclusive, but not inconsistent. In the rear wheel well, a chemical residue test picked up traces of cleaning agents similar to those used on the bathroom floor. Quaternary ammonium compound, same brand stocked in hotel housekeeping carts. This wasn't a coincidence. Inside room 327 under the bathroom sink, investigators found one item not previously logged by hotel staff, a broken earring back. It was brass-plated, curved, and wedged into the grout near the floor drain. Jasmine had been photographed wearing similar jewelry at the poker tournament earlier that night. That object was bagged, logged, and submitted for trace skin cell testing. What it suggested wasn't violence. It suggested struggle. There were no drag marks, no signs of large object movement, but small signs, hairline scuffing on tile, lateral fabric threads lodged under the vanity, one smudge on the mirror, told investigators that something had happened in that space. Something close, constrained, and deliberate. Behavioral analysis flagged this phase of the case as high risk. When offenders stage scenes but don't eliminate evidence completely, the result is a false sense of control. That psychological profile became relevant once Jenkins was located. But at this stage, law enforcement was working with spatial data and forensics, not theories. The room was sealed again after 3 hours. Lab results were pending. The crime scene was incomplete, but increasingly coherent. There was now hard evidence that Jasmine Fiore had been injured in that room, that she never left it alive, and that someone had made significant effort to remove both her and the blood she left behind. The autopsy had confirmed strangulation. The scene suggested force, but not chaos, control, but not panic. This mattered more than people assume, because what happened inside room 327 wasn't just a violent act. It was a choice, executed in silence, behind a closed bathroom door. In criminal investigations, disappearance isn't always flight. It can be calculation. The moment Ryan Jenkins crossed the border into Canada, the case shifted from a forensic homicide to an active fugitive pursuit. But what stood out wasn't just that he fled, it was how. Jenkins didn't take a commercial flight. He didn't check into another hotel. He didn't use his own credit cards. Instead, he moved with surgical caution, through back roads, border crossings rarely used, and payment methods designed to leave no trail. That was its own kind of signal, not fear, strategy. Detectives built the travel map by assembling digital and physical fragments. The last confirmed camera capture was at 4:27 a.m. on August 14th as Jenkins left L'Auberge Del Mar with a rolling black duffel. From there, license plate recognition logged his BMW X5 moving northeast through San Bernardino County by 9:40 a.m. 2 fuel receipts, one from Barstow, one from Las Vegas, were recovered through subpoenas to regional gas station chains. Both purchases were made with a prepaid card. No surveillance footage available. He kept driving. By August 16th, his vehicle was discovered abandoned inside a storage facility in Blaine, Washington, less than 30 miles from the Canadian border. No rental, no reservation. The space had been rented with cash under a fake name. The access gate log recorded one use, August 15th, 9:12 p.m. He was moving fast. When investigators coordinated with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, they learned Jenkins had legally entered Canada on August 17th through a private pedestrian crossing in Point Roberts, a remote finger of land that shares only one land connection with the U.S. The route had minimal staffing. It wasn't a coincidence. He used his Canadian passport. No checked baggage. No declared items. Authorities notified the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. A be on the lookout alert was issued nationwide, but he had a 72-hour head start. For someone with money, dual citizenship, and media training, that was enough time to disappear twice. Back in California, detectives pivoted to financial forensics. They issued subpoenas to 3 banks tied to Jenkins. Only one showed recent activity, an ATM withdrawal in Nevada the day before the border crossing. Amount $800. He hadn't used any card since. Investigators also checked his phone metadata. The device had powered off permanently at 6:11 a.m. on August 14th, just over an hour after he checked out of the hotel. Cell tower data placed it briefly along Interstate 15. Then silence. By this point, Jenkins was no longer just an uncooperative witness. His behavior met the behavioral flags for evasion: changed travel pattern, elimination of electronic trail, cross-jurisdiction movement, and staged vehicle drop. Still, authorities withheld public statements of suspicion. No arrest warrant had yet been filed, not because of lack of evidence, but because protocol required the forensic and procedural steps to be airtight. And yet the silence around his whereabouts created its own pressure. The media had begun connecting the dots. The public saw the same footage investigators did. A woman enters the hotel and never exits. A man exits alone, and then he vanishes. The weight of that sequence wasn't rhetorical, it was undeniable. A forensic financial analyst assigned to the task force made a simple note in the report. No waste in his movement, no indulgence. This wasn't panic, it was plan. That was the shift. This chapter in the case wasn't about what Jenkins did to Jasmine Fiore. It was about what he did immediately after, and the methodical precision he applied to every step of it. For investigators, it was no longer a question of whether something happened in that hotel room. It was how long he'd spent preparing for the moment it did. On August 20th, 2009, a man checked into the Thunderbird Motel in Hope, British Columbia. He arrived alone. No luggage. He paid cash for 3 nights. The name he used was Frederick Wilson. The ID he presented was Canadian. The clerk on duty later described him as quiet, polite, and emotionless. Room 2C, no requests, no disturbances. He never checked out. By the morning of August 23rd, motel staff noticed the "Do Not Disturb" sign hadn't moved. Housekeeping knocked twice, no response. At 11:32 a.m., the manager unlocked the door. The room was still. On the floor of the closet, Ryan Jenkins was found hanging from a belt attached to a wire clothing rack. He had been dead for several hours. The case shifted again. Royal Canadian Mounted Police secured the scene. A small duffel bag lay on the floor near the bed. Inside were 3 items: a passport, a laptop, and a note. The note wasn't addressed. It wasn't dated, but its contents made the message clear. It blended apology with deflection, remorse with self-protection, and yet it said little that law enforcement could act on. There was no confession. The laptop was password protected. Digital forensics extracted key files through standard recovery methods. The browser history showed no searches beyond logistics: ferry schedules, motel directories, weather maps. But hidden in a locked folder was a Word document labeled "Final." It included asset distribution instructions, access codes, and short personal statements for 2 unnamed individuals. Nowhere did it mention Jasmine Fiore. For those building the case, that omission was the loudest detail. Investigators treated the scene with the same rigor as any unattended death. Jenkins' body was photographed, fingerprinted, and sent for autopsy. The cause of death was confirmed as suicide by hanging. No drugs or alcohol in the system. No signs of external trauma. He had not attempted to disguise his identity. His passport was real. His face matched the man from the hotel surveillance tapes. The border crossing data was validated. His time in Canada had lasted just under 6 days. All signs pointed to one outcome. He had come there to die. But the timing raised questions. Why book 3 nights if he only needed 1? Why carry a laptop with encrypted files if he wasn't planning to use them? Why run, only to stop? The RCMP contacted U.S. law enforcement within the hour. A joint statement was prepared. Ryan Jenkins, person of interest in the death of Jasmine Fiore, was found deceased in British Columbia. The investigation would proceed without the opportunity for trial. That fact changed the procedural steps, but it didn't close the case. California authorities continued reviewing forensic evidence. Lab results from room 327 returned with high-confidence DNA matches. The earring back found under the sink held trace epithelial cells consistent with Fiore's profile. Luminol mapping showed at least 2 impact points in the bathroom. Fibers from the duffel bag recovered from the Nevada storage facility matched the brand and thread count of those found in the Thunderbird Motel. Despite Jenkins's death, investigators continued documentation to full conclusion. Not out of habit, but principle. When a person is never formally charged, the record becomes the verdict. What he left behind wasn't a confession. It wasn't clarity, but it was a pattern: clean movements, digital silence, forensic avoidance. And in the end, surrender, not in court, but in a motel closet. For those who knew Jasmine, it was an outcome without accountability. For law enforcement, it was a case that concluded without confrontation. And for the public, it was a reminder. Some answers arrive too late to matter in court, but they still matter. In any homicide investigation, there's the crime, and then there's the infrastructure that failed to stop it. By late August 2009, the forensic narrative of Jasmine Fiore's death had stabilized, but questions remained, questions that extended beyond Jenkins' movements or the condition of a motel closet in British Columbia. Because long before Jasmine's body was found, there were already records, warnings, court filings. None of them had stopped what happened. In 2007, 2 years before Jasmine's death, Ryan Jenkins was charged in Calgary, Alberta, with assaulting a former girlfriend. The case never went to trial. It ended with a conditional discharge. That meant no conviction. And under Canadian privacy law, that record wasn't shared across jurisdictions. When Jenkins applied to join Megan Wants a Millionaire, a reality show being cast in early 2009, that charge didn't show up in his background check. The production company, 51 Minds, outsourced their vetting to a third-party screening firm. According to internal records, only U.S. criminal data was queried. Nothing flagged. He was cleared. That decision would cascade. Jenkins became a contestant. Cameras rolled. His face entered public consciousness. Viewers were told he was a millionaire looking for love. The real story was more complicated and dangerously incomplete. Following Jasmine's death, VH1 canceled 2 programs. Megan Wants a Millionaire was pulled mid-season. I Love Money 3, a show Jenkins had won but hadn't aired yet, was permanently shelved. But the damage wasn't limited to broadcast schedules. Forensic review of Jenkins' application showed omissions. He didn't list the 2007 incident. He overstated his financial position. But without cross-border data sharing or independent verification, none of that disqualified him. Legally, the screening company hadn't broken protocol, but functionally the system had failed. A man with a documented history of violence toward women had been cast as a romantic lead. That wasn't just a breakdown. It was a liability. Interviews with Jasmine's friends revealed she had mentioned Jenkins' possessive behavior before. She had told some that she felt isolated. She had started making plans to separate quietly. But no formal complaint was ever filed. One friend later described it this way. She didn't see herself as someone who needed protection. She thought she could manage it. That's where law enforcement and social systems intersect. Domestic violence isn't always visible in the form of police reports. It often shows up in subtler ways: controlling communication, financial manipulation, isolation from social networks. Jenkins displayed these patterns, but the people around him, including casting producers, saw only charisma. He was polished, on camera, in interviews, at social events. The violence didn't appear until it was too late. Lawmakers in California began reviewing background screening laws shortly after the case closed. Advocacy groups used Jasmine Fiore's name to push for reforms in cross-jurisdictional data exchange, particularly in entertainment employment. By 2010, new industry guidelines were implemented. Major networks revised their vetting protocols, but the problem extended far beyond television. In the Fiore investigation, there was no one failure point, no single document that could have prevented her death. But there were gaps, systemic, predictable, and unaddressed. The most dangerous thing wasn't just that Jenkins passed a background check, it was that no one thought to ask better questions. The discovery of Jasmine Fiore's mutilated body in a suitcase was never going to be the end of the story. Her death was brutal, calculated, and painfully symbolic. An erasure of identity, almost literal, that mirrored the psychological erasure she'd endured during her relationship with Ryan Alexander Jenkins. But as investigators closed the file on the physical search for the perpetrator, following his suicide in a Canadian motel, the real reckoning was just beginning. The aftermath of the case forced a wider look at the machinery that had enabled him, the warning signs that had gone unheeded, and the price of the silence that surrounded their private chaos. Public reaction to the case was immediate and intense. Media outlets pounced on the salacious details: reality television, domestic abuse, a glamorous model, a charming contestant, and a grotesque act of violence. But beyond the headlines, a darker conversation emerged, one that questioned not only Jenkins' background, but also the systems that failed to flag him as a risk. At the time of his casting on VH1's Megan Wants a Millionaire, Jenkins had a documented record of domestic violence. He'd been convicted in Canada for assaulting a woman in 2005. Yet those records were never accessed or disclosed to U.S. producers. VH1 and 51 Minds Entertainment had employed an external casting agency, but no one had performed a comprehensive background check that included international criminal history. The consequences of that omission became impossible to ignore. Jasmine Fiore's murder became a turning point for reality television vetting practices. The industry, long criticized for prioritizing drama over responsibility, was publicly shamed. VH1 immediately canceled Megan Wants a Millionaire and pulled episodes from circulation. Another dating show Jenkins had filmed, I Love Money 3, was shelved entirely despite already being in post-production. Internally, networks began reevaluating their risk assessment protocols. While not all change was public-facing, the shift was undeniable. Casting departments were now instructed to perform deep-dive investigations, not just into legal records, but into behavioral history, restraining orders, and prior allegations, especially those involving interpersonal violence. But beyond television, Jasmine's case resonated more deeply because it illuminated a quieter epidemic: how manipulation and psychological control often precede physical violence. Friends had described Jenkins as jealous, controlling, prone to sudden anger masked under charisma. He and Jasmine had a volatile dynamic, full of breakups and reconciliations, marked by secrecy, surveillance, and coercion. In hindsight, these were not relationship quirks, they were precursors to a tragedy. Domestic violence advocates seized the moment to educate the public. The notion of red flags in relationships, excessive jealousy, isolation from others, control over money or time, gained more traction in public discourse. More importantly, discussions began to center not just on physical abuse, but emotional and psychological domination. It wasn't just about bruises, it was about erosion of independence, safety, and voice. Jasmine had tried to walk away. She'd filed for an annulment just days before her murder. But as so many advocates warn, leaving is often the most dangerous moment. In terms of legal aftermath, no charges were filed posthumously. There was no trial. Jenkins' death foreclosed that path. However, civil discussions arose about the responsibilities of media producers, about international background screening, and about the need for systemic oversight in entertainment industries that place strangers in intimate proximity under high-pressure, sensationalized circumstances. In California, the case led to renewed discussion around Clare's Law, which allows individuals to inquire about a partner's history of domestic violence. Though it was already under consideration, Jasmine's case brought renewed urgency to its legislative journey. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner released their findings. Jasmine had died of strangulation, and her body had been mutilated post-mortem, likely in an attempt to hinder identification. Fingerprints ultimately led to her identification, confirming that despite the attempt to erase her physically, she could not be erased from justice. The memory of Jasmine Fiore was preserved in a quieter way. Her mother, Lisa Lepore, became a vocal advocate for domestic violence victims. She spoke at fundraisers, supported shelters, and warned of the false sense of safety people feel when abusers are charming, rich, or socially validated. In her words, Jasmine wasn't weak. She was trying to survive, but he made sure she couldn't. Her statement reframed the conversation. Jasmine's death wasn't about a naive woman trusting the wrong man. It was about the systemic failure to believe patterns, to act on early warning signs, and to intervene when control escalated into terror. Jenkins' ability to escape the country, check into a motel, and hang himself before he could be held accountable was to many a final injustice. But for others, it served as a brutal reminder that justice systems must be proactive, not just reactive. Even now, 15 years after the case, Jasmine's name surfaces in discussions around domestic violence law, reality television ethics, and the unseen cost of glamorized control. And perhaps that's where the value lies, not in sensationalizing her death, but in ensuring that her story becomes part of a larger fabric of awareness, prevention, and change. In the end, stories like Jasmine's remind us how quickly love can turn into control and how silence can cost lives. If you're ever in a situation where someone chips away at your sense of self, know this: it's not your fault and you deserve better. I've told this story not just to reveal a crime, but to pass on a truth. Trust your instincts, speak up early, and support others when they do. What do you think we as a community can do better to prevent these tragedies? Have you or someone you know ever faced a similar situation? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your voice matters. If this video resonated with you, please comment where you're watching from or share your thoughts. And if it didn't, tell me why. I want to improve. If you found this video meaningful, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next case.